The thunderous crack of a single gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Montana, in 1879, as Virgil Jameson narrowly escaped death for the third time that month. He was a man who lived by one rule: never stay long enough for the past to catch up. As the setting sun painted the horizon in hues of orange and gold, he mounted his chestnut stallion and rode out of town without so much as a backward glance, the sound of his name being cursed by yet another bounty hunter fading behind him. Virgil was 32 years old, with eyes that had seen too much and a reputation that preceded him across 3 territories. Not an outlaw precisely, but a man who drifted like tumbleweeds across the vast western landscape, a tracker, a hunter, occasionally a hired gun, but always a ghost by morning. He wore his dark hair longer than most, his lean face weathered by sun and hardship, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who'd spent his life surviving. "He'll never stay put," folks would say. "Virgil Jameson, that man's got wandering in his blood, devil himself couldn't pin him down." 200 miles east, in the small settlement of Willow Springs, Zara Fairchild stood at the window of her father's general store, watching the last customers of the day filter out into the early evening. At 25, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. The daughter of the town's most respected merchant, she had taken over most of the store's operations after her mother's death 3 years prior. Her father, once robust and commanding, had begun to falter under the weight of grief and advancing age. "Zara, darling," called Henry Fairchild from behind the counter, "would you mind checking the inventory of flour before we close? I believe we're running low." "Of course, Pa," she replied, moving gracefully toward the storeroom. Her auburn hair was neatly pinned back, and her simple blue dress, though practical for work, did little to hide her natural beauty. The sound of horses outside drew her attention. Through the window, she watched as 3 men dismounted in front of the saloon across the street. Something about their demeanor, the way they surveyed the town with cold calculation, sent a chill down her spine. "Pa," she called quietly, "I think there might be trouble." Before Henry could respond, the door swung open with a bang. A man with a pockmarked face and yellowed teeth sauntered in, his eyes immediately finding Zara. "Well, ain't this a fine establishment?" he drawled, running his fingers along a shelf of canned goods. "You must be doing right well for yourself, old man." Henry straightened, summoning what dignity he could. "We're about to close, sir. If there's something specific you need—" "Oh, I need plenty," the man interrupted, his gaze never leaving Zara. "Starting with all the cash you got stashed away." 2 more men entered behind him, hands resting on their holstered pistols. "This doesn't have to get ugly," the leader continued. "Just hand over your money, maybe throw in some supplies, and we'll be on our way." Henry moved protectively toward Zara. "Take what money's in the register and go." "But leave my daughter be," the leader laughed, a sound like gravel underfoot. "Ain't that sweet, but I don't think you're in a position to be making demands, old man." What happened next occurred with terrifying speed. Henry reached beneath the counter, presumably for the shotgun he kept there. The leader's gun appeared in his hand as if by dark magic. A shot rang out. Henry crumpled to the floor. Zara's scream tore through the evening air as she rushed to her father's side. Blood bloomed across his chest, his eyes already growing distant. "Pa, no, please, no." She sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound. "Now look what you made me do," the leader sighed, as if genuinely inconvenienced. "Boys, clean out the register and the storeroom. Grab anything valuable." As his companions ransacked the store, the leader crouched beside Zara, who cradled her father's head in her lap. Henry's breathing had grown shallow, each breath a painful struggle. "Such a pretty thing," the man murmured, touching her tear-stained cheek. "Maybe we'll take you with us when we go." "A man gets lonely on the trail." "Go to hell," Zara hissed through her tears. The leader chuckled, standing again. "Feisty too, I like that. Marshal's coming," a voice shouted from outside. "Riders approaching from the east," the leader cursed. "Change of plans, boys. Grab what you can carry and let's ride." In minutes they were gone, leaving devastation in their wake. The store was ransacked, goods scattered across the floor, and Henry Fairchild lay dying in his daughter's arms. "Zara," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My brave girl." "Save your strength, Pa," she pleaded, her vision blurred by tears. "Help is coming." His weathered hand reached up to touch her face. "You remember what your mother used to say, the strongest hearts are forged in fire." His eyes, so like her own, held hers with desperate intensity. "Your heart is the strongest I've ever known." By the time Marshal Peters arrived with his deputies, Henry Fairchild had drawn his last breath. Zara sat motionless beside him, her dress soaked with his blood, her eyes fixed on nothing. "Miss Fairchild," the marshal said gently, kneeling beside her, "I'm so sorry. Can you tell me what happened?" Through numb lips, Zara described the three men, the leader with his pockmarked face, the casual way he'd murdered her father, the threats he'd made. "The Blackwell Gang," one of the deputies muttered. "They've been hitting small towns all across the territory, led by Silas Crawford Mean as a rattler and twice as deadly. We'll go after them," the marshal promised, helping Zara to her feet. "But first, let's take care of your father." The next days passed in a haze of grief. The town rallied around Zara, helping with funeral arrangements, bringing food she couldn't eat, offering condolences that couldn't penetrate her sorrow. Through it all, she moved like a ghost through the rooms of the home she'd shared with her father. On the third night after the funeral, she sat alone at the kitchen table, a lamp burning low, when a knock came at the door. Marshal Peters stood on her porch, hat in hand. "Miss Fairchild," he began awkwardly, "I've come with news about your father's killers." Hope flared briefly. "You've caught them," the marshal's expression told her otherwise. "They've crossed into Dakota territory, outside my jurisdiction. I've sent word to the authorities there, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Justice was unlikely. After he left, Zara stood in the empty store, surrounded by the remnants of her father's life's work. The shelves had been partially restocked with the help of neighbors, but many remained bare. Without the money that had been stolen, restocking fully would be impossible. Even if she could, the prospect of running the store alone, with the memories of that night ever present, was unbearable. A decision crystallized within her. If justice wouldn't find Silas Crawford and his gang, then she would have to seek it herself. But she couldn't do it alone. The next morning, she approached Marshal Peters again. "I need to find someone," she said without preamble. "A man who can track down Crawford and his gang," the marshal frowned. "Miss Fairchild, I understand your grief, but vengeance won't bring your father back." "It's not vengeance," she replied, though they both knew it was a lie. "It's justice. Those men need to be stopped before they destroy more lives." Seeing the determination in her eyes, the marshal sighed. "There's one man who might be able to help you, best tracker I've ever known. Problem is, no one knows how to find him." "Who?" "Virgil Jameson. He passes through here occasionally, helping the army track renegades or hunting bounties. Man moves like a shadow and never stays in one place more than a night or two. They say he's part ghost." "Where was he last seen?" The marshal rubbed his chin. "Heard rumors he was up near the Montana border a couple weeks back, but like I said, he's not an easy man to find." "I'll find him," Zara stated, the first sense of purpose she'd felt since her father's death taking root within her. That afternoon, she made arrangements for a neighbor to watch over the store. She packed a small trunk with essentials, clothes, her father's old revolver, the money she'd saved over the years, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. Lastly, she tucked a worn photograph of her parents into her pocket, close to her heart. The stage to Helena would depart at dawn. From there, she would begin her search for the elusive Virgil Jameson, a man she'd never met, but upon whom all her hopes now rested. The journey north was arduous, the spring weather unpredictable. Zara, who had rarely traveled beyond the boundaries of Willow Springs, found herself among strangers, navigating unfamiliar territories with nothing but determination to guide her. She'd spent most of her savings on the stagecoach fare, with enough remaining for perhaps 2 weeks of modest accommodations and meals. In Helena, she began asking questions. Most people had heard of Virgil Jameson, but few claimed to have seen him recently. Some spoke of him with awe, others with suspicion. He was a legend, a ghost, a myth made flesh. "The man's a demon with a gun," an old prospector told her over dinner at a boarding house. Saw him once take down 3 men before any of them could clear leather. I heard he was raised by wolves after Indians killed his family, a young cowhand contributed eagerly. Nonsense, countered the boarding house owner, a stern-faced widow. Jameson's just a man who prefers his own company to others. Can't say I blame him, considering the sort he typically deals with. For 2 weeks, Zara followed whispers and rumors from Helena to smaller settlements throughout the territory. Her funds dwindled rapidly. She sold her mother's silver locket for travel money, each mile taking her further from everything familiar and deeper into a world ruled by men's laws and men's violence. In a small mining town called Silver Creek, her luck finally changed. The local saloon keeper, a woman named Edith with sharp eyes and sharper wits, recognized the name immediately. Virgil Jameson. Sure, I know him. He comes through every few months, was here not 3 weeks ago, in fact. Zara's heart quickened. Do you know where he was headed? Edith studied her carefully. What's a proper young lady like yourself want with a man like Jameson? Briefly, Zara explained about her father's murder and the Blackwell Gang. As she spoke, Edith's expression softened. I'm sorry for your troubles, girl. But you should know Virgil ain't the sort to take on a job out of the goodness of his heart. He works for pay, and from the looks of you, money's in short supply. I'll find a way to pay him, Zara insisted. Edith sighed. He mentioned heading up toward Fort Benton. Said something about a job for the army. If you're determined to find him, that's your best bet. Fort Benton was another 2 days' journey. By the time Zara arrived, her remaining money would barely cover a night's lodging. She'd have to find work soon, or else return to Willow Springs, empty-handed, something she refused to consider. The fort itself was a bustling center of trade, situated on the Missouri River. Soldiers, traders, and travelers of all descriptions moved through its gates. Zara, travel-worn and increasingly desperate, began her inquiries at the headquarters building. A young lieutenant regarded her with surprise when she asked about Virgil Jameson. Madam, I couldn't say where Jameson is precisely. He completed a tracking job for us last week, found a deserter who'd stolen army property. Collected his payment and rode out. He's not one to announce his plans. Please, Zara pressed, it's urgent that I find him. Is there anyone who might know where he was headed? The lieutenant considered her request. You might try old Pete at the livery. Jameson stables his horse there when he's in town. If anyone knows his habits, it would be Pete. Old Pete, as it turned out, was a grizzled former cavalryman with a limp and a perpetual scowl. He eyed Zara suspiciously when she approached him in the stable yard. Jameson, he repeated after she'd asked her question. What's a lady like you want with him? Tired of explaining herself, Zara simply said, I have a job for him, one that pays well. The lie came easily now after weeks of similar deceptions. Pete snorted. Well, you just missed him. He rode out 3 days ago, heading west, said something about Elkhorn Ridge. How far is that? Day's ride, maybe more in this weather. He glanced at her travel-stained dress and obvious exhaustion. Not a journey for a woman alone, but Zara was beyond heeding such warnings. After securing directions to Elkhorn Ridge, she spent her last dollars on supplies and the rental of a sturdy mare. At dawn the next day, she set out, her father's revolver tucked into her saddlebag, her resolve hardened by weeks of fruitless searching. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as she rode west. The mare, though reliable, was clearly accustomed to easier trails. By midday, storm clouds had gathered over the distant mountains, promising a difficult afternoon. Sure enough, by late afternoon, rain began to fall. What had started as a gentle shower soon became a downpour, the trail turning to mud beneath her horse's hooves. Zara, soaked to the skin and shivering, began to fear she'd made a terrible mistake. As dusk approached, the storm intensified. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by deafening thunder. The mare, spooked by the noise, reared suddenly. Unprepared, Zara lost her grip on the reins and fell heavily to the ground, pain shooting through her ankle as she landed. The mare bolted, disappearing into the gathering darkness with all of Zara's supplies. Alone, injured, and with night falling rapidly, she faced the very real possibility that she might not survive until morning. Limping painfully, she sought shelter beneath an overhanging rock. The rain continued to pour, turning the ground around her into a quagmire. Cold seeped into her bones. Exhaustion pulled at her, tempting her to close her eyes just for a moment. It was in that desperate hour, as consciousness began to slip away, that Zara thought of her father's final words. The strongest hearts are forged in fire. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, she forced herself to stay awake, to keep fighting. And in the gathering darkness, with rain cascading around her and hope fading like the last light of day, she called out a name not in expectation of an answer, but as a final act of defiance against the encroaching night. Virgil Jameson. Her voice, carried on the wind, seemed to dissipate instantly among the sounds of the storm, but she called again, louder this time. Virgil Jameson, in the distance, a flicker of light appeared so brief she thought she might have imagined it. Then it reappeared, steadier now. A lantern moving through the darkness. Hello, a deep voice called, barely audible above the storm. Who's there? Here, Zara shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. I'm over here. The light grew closer. Through the curtain of rain, a figure emerged, a man leading a horse, his face obscured by the brim of his hat and the shadows cast by the lantern he carried. He stopped a few feet away, raising the lantern to better see her. In its glow, Zara saw a face weathered by sun and wind, dark eyes narrowed in suspicion, and a mouth set in a hard line beneath several days' growth of beard. "You're a long way from anywhere, madam," the man said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this weather?" Through chattering teeth, Zara managed to say, "Are you Virgil Jameson?" Surprise flickered across his features. "I might be, depends on who's asking and why. My name is Zara Fairchild. I've been searching for you for weeks." A violent shiver racked her body, cutting off further explanation. Virgil assessed her condition quickly. "Questions can wait. You're half frozen and, by the looks of it, injured." He moved closer, crouching beside her. "Can you stand?" With his help, Zara tried to put weight on her injured ankle, only to cry out in pain. "That answers that," he muttered, then surprised her by scooping her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "My camp's not far. Hold onto the lantern." Cradled against his chest, sheltered somewhat from the rain by his duster, Zara felt the first stirrings of hope. She'd found him, or rather, he'd found her. Now she just had to convince him to help her. Virgil's camp was indeed nearby, situated in a small cave that provided perfect shelter from the elements. Inside, a small fire burned, casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. He set her down carefully near the fire, then busied himself tending to his horse. "Take those wet clothes off," he instructed without looking at her. "There's a blanket in my saddlebag. I'll step outside while you change." True to his word, he exited the cave, leaving Zara to struggle out of her sodden dress and undergarments. The blanket he'd mentioned was wool, rough against her skin but blissfully warm. By the time he returned, she was huddled by the fire, her wet clothes spread nearby to dry, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Virgil added wood to the fire, then knelt beside her to examine her ankle. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he probed the swollen joint. "Not broken," he pronounced after a moment. "Bad sprain, though. You won't be walking far for a few days." He rummaged in his pack and produced a flask, offering it to her. "Whiskey, not for drinking, medicinal purposes only." Despite her discomfort, Zara managed a small smile. "My father used to say the same thing. Smart man, your father." He uncorked the flask and poured a small amount of the amber liquid onto a cloth, then carefully wrapped it around her ankle. The burning sensation made her wince, but she didn't complain. "Now," Virgil said, settling across the fire from her, "suppose you tell me why a young woman like yourself is out in the middle of nowhere, in a storm, calling my name like some kind of incantation." So Zara told him everything: her father's murder, the marshal's inability to pursue Crawford and his gang beyond the territorial boundary, her determination to see justice done. As she spoke, Virgil's expression remained impassive, giving no indication of his thoughts. I know what you're thinking, she concluded. That I'm naive or foolish to have come all this way, but I'm not asking you to do this for free. I can pay you. With what? He asked bluntly. No offense, Miss Fairchild, but you don't look like you've got $2 to rub together at the moment. The store, she replied. My father's store, it's worth something. When Crawford and his men are brought to justice, I'll sell it and pay you what you're owed. Plus, there's a reward for their capture, $500, dead or alive. Virgil was silent for a long moment, studying her across the flames. Finally, he said, $500 is a decent sum, but tracking men like Crawford isn't just about money. It's dangerous work. They won't hesitate to kill again. I understand the risks, he shook his head. I don't think you do, but that's beside the point. What makes you think I'd be willing to help you at all, payment or no? The question caught Zara off guard. In all her planning, all her desperate searching, she'd never considered that Virgil might simply refuse. Because it's the right thing to do, she said finally. Because innocent people are being hurt and you have the skills to stop it. A bitter laugh escaped him. The right thing, Miss Fairchild, men like me don't typically concern themselves with right and wrong. We concern ourselves with survival. I don't believe that, she countered, meeting his gaze steadily. If that were true, you wouldn't have come out in this storm when you heard someone calling for help. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant acknowledgement of her point. Before he could respond, a particularly loud thunderclap shook the cave, causing both of them to start. Get some rest, Virgil said, effectively ending the conversation. We'll talk more in the morning. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Zara for some time. She watched Virgil from beneath half-closed lids as he tended the fire, cleaned his pistol with practiced efficiency, and occasionally glanced in her direction, his expression unreadable. Eventually, the warmth of the fire and the rhythmic sound of rain outside lulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to sunlight filtering into the cave and the smell of coffee brewing. Her ankle throbbed dully, but the swelling had subsided somewhat. Virgil was nowhere to be seen, but a cup of steaming coffee had been placed near her makeshift bed. Carefully, Zara sat up, keeping the blanket wrapped around her. Her clothes, she noted with relief, were dry. After ensuring she was alone, she dressed quickly, then hobbled to the cave entrance, using the rock wall for support. Outside, the world had been washed clean by the storm. Sunlight sparkled on wet leaves, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Virgil stood a short distance away, brushing down his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion with intelligent eyes. You should be resting that ankle, he called without turning around. It feels better, she lied, making her way slowly toward him. Virgil glanced at her, his expression skeptical. Sure it does. He finished with the horse and turned to face her fully. In the daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and the easy, balanced stance of a man accustomed to physical action. His face, clean-shaven now, revealed strong features, a square jaw, high cheekbones, and those dark, assessing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I've been thinking about your proposal, he said, gesturing for her to sit on a fallen log while he remained standing. Zara lowered herself carefully, hope rising within her. And I'll help you find Crawford and his gang. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. He held up a hand, cutting her off. There are conditions. First, when we find them, you stay back. This isn't negotiable. Second, I decide how we approach this. If I say we wait, we wait. If I say we leave, we leave. Clear? Zara nodded quickly. Clear. Third, he continued, his gaze intensifying, when this is over, we're done. I collect my payment and go my way, you go yours. No expectations beyond that. Something about the finality in his tone stung, though Zara couldn't have explained why. Of course, I understand. Virgil studied her for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Good, now your ankle needs at least another day of rest. Then we'll head toward the nearest town, see if we can pick up Crawford's trail. The day passed slowly. Virgil spent most of it outside the cave, hunting, checking his traps, and preparing his gear for travel. Zara, confined by her injury, found herself watching him whenever he was nearby, fascinated by the economy of his movements, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. That evening, they shared a meal of rabbit stew cooked over the fire. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but Zara found herself wanting to know more about this man who had agreed to help her. "How long have you been a tracker?" she asked as they finished eating. Virgil looked up as if surprised by the question. "Most of my life, I suppose." "Learned from my father who learned from his. And your family, where are they now?" A shadow crossed his face. "Gone, long time ago." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged, but the casualness of the gesture seemed forced. "It was a long time ago. Is that why you travel?" She persisted, sensing there was more to the story. "Because there's nothing holding you in one place." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a sigh, he set aside his plate. "Partly. But mostly, I learned early that staying put makes you a target. Keep moving, keep your head down, mind your own business. That's how you survive out here." "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "Better lonely than dead," he replied bluntly. Zara considered this. "My mother used to say that a life without connection isn't really living at all. It's just existing." Virgil's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Zara agreed, a familiar pang of grief touching her heart. "She died when I was 22. Fever took her in less than a week." "And now your father as well," Virgil observed quietly. "Yet here you are, riding across the territory alone, chasing killers. Most women would have accepted the marshal's explanation and tried to rebuild their lives." "Would you have? If it were your family?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he admitted finally. "I wouldn't have." The next morning, Zara's ankle had improved enough that she could put weight on it, though walking remained painful. Virgil fashioned a crude crutch from a branch, then helped her mount his horse. He would walk beside them, he explained, at least until they reached the next settlement. "What happened to your horse, anyway?" he asked as they set out. "You mentioned falling, but not how you came to be alone." "She bolted during the storm," Zara explained, "after I fell." "She had all my supplies with her," Virgil grunted. "We'll keep an eye out. Horses often don't go far once the weather calms." True to his word, they found the mare grazing in a meadow not 2 miles from where Zara had fallen. Her saddlebags were still intact, though some of the contents had been soaked by rain. The nearest town was Rivercross, a small settlement that had grown up around a trading post. They arrived as the sun was setting, an odd pair that drew curious glances from locals. Virgil leading 2 horses, Zara riding side saddle on his chestnut stallion, her makeshift crutch secured to the saddle. "We'll need supplies," Virgil said as they approached the town's only hotel. "And information. Crawford and his gang don't exactly advertise their whereabouts, but men like that leave a trail." The hotel was a simple 2-story building with a small dining room attached. Virgil secured 2 rooms, helped Zara to hers, then went to stable the horses. By the time he returned, she had washed away the dirt of travel and changed into the one clean dress she had remaining. They met for dinner in the hotel's dining room, where Virgil immediately began questioning the proprietor about any strangers who might have passed through recently. "3 men, you say?" The man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Could be the same ones who stopped here about a week back. Rough-looking bunch. One had a face like he'd survived smallpox, paid for everything in silver dollars." Zara's pulse quickened. "That's them." "Did they say where they were headed?" The proprietor shook his head. "Not to me. But they spent quite a bit of time talking to old Jim Barnes over at the saloon. If anyone knows, it'd be him." After dinner, Virgil insisted that Zara return to her room and rest while he visited the saloon to speak with Barnes. Despite her protests, she knew he was right. Her ankle still throbbed painfully, and her strength hadn't fully returned after her ordeal in the storm. "I'll come get you if I learn anything important," he promised as he walked her to her door. "Otherwise, get some sleep. We'll likely have a long day tomorrow." Left alone, Zara found herself too restless for sleep despite her fatigue. Her mind raced with thoughts of her father, of Crawford and his men, and, increasingly, of Virgil Jameson. There was something compelling about him beyond his skills as a tracker or his willingness to help her. A depth to him that he kept carefully hidden, like still waters running deep beneath a frozen surface. She was still awake when a knock came at her door shortly before midnight. Opening it, she found Virgil, his expression tight with suppressed excitement. "I found them," he said without preamble. "Or rather, I found where they're headed." Barnes was more than happy to talk once I bought him a few drinks. "Crawford and his men are planning to hit a payroll shipment coming through Blackwater Canyon, 3 days' ride from here." "When?" "5 days from now, according to Barnes. If we leave at first light, we can get there ahead of them, alert the authorities." "No," Zara protested immediately. "If we involve the law, they might escape again. We have to handle this ourselves." Virgil's eyes narrowed. "By ourselves, you mean me. Remember our agreement, Miss Fairchild." "You stay back when the time comes." "Of course," she agreed quickly. "I just meant that we shouldn't risk losing them by involving others." He studied her face, clearly suspicious of her ready acquiescence, but eventually nodded. "Get some sleep. We leave at dawn." True to his word, they were on the trail as the first light of day touched the eastern horizon. Zara, riding her recovered mare, found that her ankle had improved considerably overnight. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they traveled west toward Blackwater Canyon, a notorious stretch of land that had claimed the lives of many travelers over the years. For 3 days, they rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. During these breaks, a tentative camaraderie developed between them. Virgil, though still reserved, began to share occasional stories from his travels encounters with grizzly bears, a winter spent trapped in a mountain cabin, a near miss with a Sioux war party. In return, Zara told him about growing up in Willow Springs, about her mother's quiet strength and her father's unwavering integrity. She spoke of the store of her life before it had been shattered by violence, and of her uncertainty about what would come after. "Will you go back?" Virgil asked on the third night as they sat beside their small campfire. "To Willow Springs, I mean, after this is over." Zara stared into the flames, considering the question. "I don't know. There's nothing left for me there now except memories, but I don't know where else I would go." "You could sell the store like you mentioned. Use the money to start fresh somewhere new." The thought both frightened and exhilarated her. "Perhaps. What about you? After you collect your payment, where will you go?" Virgil shrugged, his familiar response to personal questions. "Wherever the wind takes me, I suppose. That's my way. Always moving, never staying," Zara murmured. "Doesn't it get tiring?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Sometimes, but it's safer than the alternative." "Which is?" "Caring about something or someone enough to stay." His eyes met hers across the fire, and for a brief moment, Zara glimpsed a vulnerability in them that made her heart ache. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual guarded expression. The following day, they reached the outskirts of Blackwater Canyon. Virgil scouted ahead, returning with news that the canyon was as treacherous as its reputation suggested, narrow, with steep walls and few places to take cover. "The payroll shipment will be coming through on the main trail," he explained as they made camp well hidden from the road. "Crawford and his men will likely set up an ambush at the narrowest point where the canyon walls are closest together. That gives us an advantage. We know where they'll be." "So what's your plan?" Zara asked. "I'll position myself above the ambush point on the canyon rim. When Crawford makes his move, I'll have a clear shot from above." "And me, what do I do?" Virgil's expression hardened. "You stay here with the horses. If you hear gunfire, be ready to ride either to help me if I signal or away if things go badly." Zara wanted to protest, to insist on being closer to the action, but she recognized the logic in his plan. "Fine," she agreed reluctantly, "but promise me you'll be careful." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her concern. "I always am." They spent the next day observing the canyon, mapping out positions and escape routes. Virgil cleaned his rifle and pistol meticulously, checked and rechecked his ammunition. Zara, despite her promise to stay behind, insisted on practicing with her father's revolver until her aim was at least passable. As dusk fell, an unexpected tension grew between them, the awareness that tomorrow might change everything. Danger hung in the air as palpably as the scent of pine and dust. "You should get some rest," Virgil said eventually, his voice gruff. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "I'm not sure I can sleep," Zara admitted. He studied her face in the fading light, having second thoughts. "No," she replied firmly. "I want justice for my father. It's just—" She hesitated, unsure how to express the tumult of emotions within her. "I'm afraid of what happens after, of going back to a life that no longer exists." Virgil moved closer, sitting beside her on the fallen log that served as their bench. "After my family was killed," he said quietly, "I thought the same thing, that there was no way forward, no future worth having, so I ran. I've been running ever since." "Is that what you'd advise me to do?" she asked, turning to look at him. Their faces were close now, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the subtle scar that ran along his jawline, the depth of emotion he usually kept so carefully hidden. "No," he murmured. "I'd advise you to be braver than I was." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then, with a gentle hesitancy that belied his usual confidence, Virgil leaned forward and kissed her. It was a brief kiss, almost chaste, yet it sent a current of warmth through Zara's entire body. When he pulled away, his eyes searched hers, questioning. In answer, she reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his cheek with her fingertips. "Virgil," she whispered, his name like a prayer on her lips. This time, when their lips met, there was nothing hesitant about it. The kiss deepened, fueled by the danger awaiting them tomorrow and the connection that had been building between them since that stormy night in the cave. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I shouldn't have done that," Virgil said, though his eyes told a different story. "Why not?" "Because tomorrow I might die, or worse, you might." Zara shook her head. "All the more reason not to waste tonight regretting what we might have done." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if memorizing every detail of her face. Then, with a sigh that seemed to release years of carefully maintained control, he pulled her into his arms. Under a canopy of stars, they found solace in each other's embrace, their bodies speaking the words their hearts weren't yet ready to voice. For a few precious hours, the past and future ceased to exist. There was only the present, only this unexpected connection that had bloomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. Dawn broke clear and cold, the sky a palette of pink and gold that belied the tension of the day ahead. They prepared in silence, the intimacy of the night before giving way to the grim reality of their purpose. As Virgil checked his weapons one final time, Zara approached him, determination etched on her features. "I'm coming with you," she stated. He looked up sharply. "We agreed, no," she interrupted. "You decided, and I didn't argue because I knew you wouldn't listen. But I didn't come all this way to hide while someone else risks their life for my cause. I'm coming with you." Virgil's jaw tightened. "It's too dangerous." "Life is dangerous," she countered. "My father died in his own store in a town he'd lived in for 30 years. Nowhere is truly safe. At least this way I face the danger on my own terms." They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Virgil's shoulders sagged slightly. "You'll stay behind me," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "And if I tell you to run, you run. No questions, no hesitation." Zara nodded, relief and anxiety mingling in her chest. "I promise." The payroll shipment was due to pass through the canyon shortly after noon. By mid-morning, Virgil and Zara had positioned themselves on the canyon rim, overlooking the spot where the trail narrowed most dramatically, the perfect place for an ambush. "Crawford will likely have his men spread out," Virgil explained in hushed tones as they lay flat against the warm rock. "One to stop the wagon, the others to cover the rear and sides." Sure enough, just before noon, 3 riders appeared at the far end of the canyon. Even from a distance, Zara recognized the pockmarked face of the leader, Silas Crawford, the man who had murdered her father without a second thought. Rage and fear twisted in her stomach as she watched the men dismount and take positions among the rocks. Crawford himself positioned a large boulder at the edge of a small cliff, ready to be pushed onto the trail below when the wagon approached. "Clever," Virgil muttered. "Block the path with the rock, force the wagon to stop. Clean and simple." They waited in tense silence as the minutes ticked by. Finally, the sound of hoofbeats and creaking wheels echoed through the canyon. The payroll wagon appeared, driven by two men with a third riding escort alongside. "Get ready," Virgil whispered, raising his rifle. "When the shooting starts, stay down." Below, Crawford gave a signal. His accomplice pushed the boulder, which crashed onto the trail just yards ahead of the approaching wagon. The driver pulled hard on the reins, the horses rearing in panic as the wagon skidded to a halt. "Hands up," Crawford's voice carried clearly in the canyon. "This is a robbery." The driver and his companions began to comply, raising their hands slowly. That's when Virgil took his shot. The rifle crack echoed off the canyon walls as Crawford's accomplice by the boulder fell, clutching his chest. Chaos erupted below. Crawford and his remaining man dove for cover, firing blindly toward the rim where Virgil and Zara were positioned. "Stay down," Virgil ordered, squeezing off another shot that splintered rock near Crawford's hiding place. The payroll guards, seizing the opportunity, drew their own weapons and began returning fire at the robbers. Caught in a crossfire, Crawford and his man were pinned down. Then, in a move that sent ice through Zara's veins, Crawford broke from cover and sprinted toward the wagon. Before the guards could react, he had grabbed one of them, using the man as a shield. "Hold your fire," Crawford shouted, "or this man dies." Virgil lowered his rifle, cursing under his breath. "He's trying to negotiate his way out. We can't let him escape," Zara hissed. "Not again." Below, Crawford was backing away from the wagon, his hostage held firmly before him, his gun pressed to the man's temple. "I'm riding out of here," he called to the remaining guards. "Anyone tries to follow, this fellow gets a bullet in his brain." It was happening again. Crawford would slip away, just as he had from Willow Springs. Justice would be denied once more. Without conscious thought, Zara reached for her father's revolver. "Zara, no." Virgil's warning came too late. She stood, exposing herself at the canyon rim, and aimed the pistol with both hands. Crawford looked up at the movement, his eyes widening in surprise. For a split second, his gun moved away from his hostage's head toward Zara. That moment of distraction was all Virgil needed. His rifle cracked again, and Crawford staggered backward, releasing his hostage as he fell. His remaining accomplice, seeing his leader fall, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "It's over," Virgil said quietly, lowering his rifle. Zara stood frozen, the revolver still gripped in her trembling hands. The reality of what had just occurred, what might have happened if Virgil hadn't acted when he did, washed over her in a cold wave. "I could have gotten us both killed," she whispered. Virgil took the gun gently from her hands. "But you didn't. And now your father can rest in peace." They made their way down to the canyon floor where the payroll guards had secured the surviving robber. Crawford lay motionless where he had fallen, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Zara approached cautiously, needing to see for herself that the man who had haunted her nightmares was truly gone. "He won't hurt anyone else now," one of the guards said, misinterpreting her expression for fear. "No," she agreed softly. "He won't." The aftermath unfolded with surprising speed. The payroll guards were grateful for the assistance, especially after learning that Crawford and his gang were wanted for multiple robberies and murders across the territory. They promised to ensure that the reward money would be paid in full. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Virgil and Zara found themselves alone once more, their horses packed and ready for departure. The question that had been building between them since the night before now hung in the air, demanding an answer. "Where will you go now?" Zara asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the tumult in her heart. Virgil looked toward the setting sun, his profile sharp against the golden light. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" He turned to her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "On you. On whether there's a reason for me to stop running." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "What about your rule, never stay in one place too long?" "Some rules," he said, moving closer, "are meant to be broken." "They said you'd never stay," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "That Virgil Jameson couldn't be tied to any one place." A smile touched his lips as he intertwined his fingers with hers. "They weren't wrong, until now, until you called my name at dusk and changed everything." As the last light of day painted the canyon in hues of fire and gold, Virgil pulled Zara into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that promised not just passion but possibility, the chance to build something lasting from the ashes of the past. "Come with me," he murmured against her hair. "We'll collect that reward, then go wherever you want, start fresh together." Zara leaned back to look into his eyes, finding in them the home she'd been searching for since the night her father died. "Together," she agreed, her heart lighter than it had been in months. They rode out of Blackwater Canyon side by side, leaving behind ghosts of the past and moving toward a future neither had dared imagine. The man who'd never stay had found his reason to put down roots in the woman whose voice had called to him through the storm. Years later, folks in the small town of New Haven would tell stories about the couple who ran the trading post on the edge of town, the tracker with eyes that missed nothing and his wife with the quiet strength. Few knew their full story, how they'd found each other in the vast wilderness of the West, or the circumstances that had brought them together. But sometimes, as dusk fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, passers-by might catch a glimpse of them standing together on their porch, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. And if they listened carefully, they might hear her voice, soft in the gathering darkness, calling his name not in desperation as she once had, but in a love that had finally given them both a place to belong.